Hi, this is Dr. Bob Dannenhoffer, the Public Health Officer for Douglas County. We have a very special Facebook Live tonight. So over the last 2 weeks, almost all the questions we've gotten have been about vaccines. So I was asked to do a 50-minute presentation, and on one chalkboard, it's a whiteboard actually, to write everything that I knew about vaccine and everything you needed to know about vaccines. So that was a challenge that I'm going to take up. What I will tell you tonight is that all the information I give you is the information that is up to date as of 6 o'clock on Tuesday, January 5th, but things are changing very rapidly. Just in the space of the last 48 hours, there have been a lot of changes, and so it's correct as till to today. There's some things that I'm very sure of, like how many doses have arrived this week. Some things I'm moderately sure about, how many doses will arrive later this week. But as time gets further and further out, my predictions about things get worse and worse. Think about the weatherman. Predictions of what the weather is going to be like tonight is a lot better than the prediction of what it's going to be like at the end of the month. But nonetheless, we'll give it a best try. So of the vaccines, I'm going to write on the board here, of the vaccines, there are a number of different vaccines, and we'll start at the top. The first vaccine approved was the Pfizer vaccine. The Pfizer vaccine is an mRNA vaccine. It's made by a German company called BioNTech and supported by an American company called Pfizer. The way an mRNA vaccine works is that they got the genome of this virus very early on from the Chinese. The genome is the sequence of RNA nucleotides that string together to make the genetic material for this virus. There was a snippet in there which codes for the spike protein, and they took that snippet of RNA, purified it, multiplied it, and put it in a vaccine where there's little bits of this mRNA surrounded by a little fatty bubble that gets put together. It gets injected into your body. Those little bubbles of fat get taken up by cells. The cells eat the fat. There's mRNA left. The mRNA instructs the cell to make protein. The protein they make is the spike protein, which gets on the surface of the cell. The spike protein on the surface of the cell induces an antibody response, and you make antibodies, and hopefully you're immune to the disease. This mRNA vaccine was tested in a double-blinded trial and was found to be over 90% effective. Over 90% effective is truly remarkable for any vaccine. Most of the vaccines we have, we would love to have over 95% effectiveness. So some of the vaccines, like the measles vaccine and the rubella vaccine, are about that effective. But for the first try at an mRNA vaccine, that was amazing. It had no major side effects, but did have some minor side effects, allergic reactions, did have some minor side effects of pain when you get the vaccine. The U.S. has bought 100 million of these vaccines, and there's a report that we've bought another 100 million of those vaccines. So I'm doing the vaccines in millions there. So we have 100 and bought another 100. This got approved in mid-December and was the first vaccine shipped. This is the vaccine that requires the ultra-cold storage. So you've seen a lot about the dry ice and whatever you need to do this. This requires the ultra-cold storage. The second vaccine that got approved was the Moderna vaccine. Moderna is a U.S. company, but Moderna has never made a vaccine before, so they have relied on other companies to actually make it, and they have done the research and the marketing for this, but they've depended upon other companies. It also is an mRNA vaccine. It's also more than 90% effective. It had also no major side effects, but doesn't require ultra-cold storage. It just requires freezer storage. So these are the two vaccines that are approved. We think for this that we have about 200 million doses of the Moderna vaccine. Both of these require 2 doses. So when we have 200 million doses of Moderna, it could vaccinate 100 million people. The Pfizer, we could vaccinate another 100 million people. So we could vaccinate about 200 million people with the doses from Pfizer and Moderna. There are several other vaccines that are on the horizon. One of those is the J&J vaccine, Johnson & Johnson. This is an adenovirus vaccine. We still do not know the results of this yet. It may come up for review later in the spring. And then there's the AstraZeneca vaccine. The AstraZeneca vaccine is made by a cooperative agreement between AstraZeneca and the University of Oxford in England. It's already been approved some places in Europe. It is not yet up for approval in the United States. And then there's one called Novavax. And again, that's another company that's going to make this vaccine. We have some trials of each of these vaccines, but no final results, nor do we have on any of those enough data to go ahead and ask for an FDA approval. So those are the vaccines. These vaccines then are all bought by the federal government. So the feds have bought all of the vaccines. So none of this vaccine in the U.S. is going to go to get sold to pharmacies or whatever. So it was all bought by the federal government with a program called Warp Speed, which actually was a pretty amazing program. What it did was it basically pre-bought the vaccines. So typically what would happen is the company would spend a lot of its money developing the vaccine, not going to the next step until you had good progress on the first one. And that's why vaccines normally take many years to put together. What Operation Warp Speed said is, we'll go ahead and buy the vaccines now while there's still ideas, and if they work, great. If they don't work, well, then we've lost money, but we haven't lost time. And because of that, we were able to get these vaccines done in record time, less than a year between the time we finally first knew about the virus and the time that you get a vaccine. That is truly remarkable. And I think that the vaccines had an impeccable process that reviewed the data, carefully looked at the side effects. So I think the vaccine is safe. And in fact, I was able to be vaccinated today with the Moderna vaccine, and I feel perfectly good with that. So far, the vaccine didn't hurt at all, and I don't have any side effects from it now. So again, although this was sped up, I think the safety process was very reasonable. The safety process on both of these were looked at by an outside FDA panel. These are not people who work for the government. These are not people who work for the drug companies. These are people who study vaccines, really smart people, and they looked at it and they agreed that these vaccines look safe and effective. Then the Council on Immunization Practices, which is a Committee on Immunization Practices, which is another outside group that looked at these, thought that they were safe and effective. And then third, a Western States Review Panel between Oregon, Washington, California, and Nevada looked at this. And again, a bunch of outside vaccine experts looked at this and thought they were safe and effective. So this vaccine, although it's clearly been the fastest vaccines we've ever had, I mean, far and away the fastest vaccines we've ever developed, they've actually had the most rigorous safety process, and I'm feeling really comfortable that the mRNA vaccines are great. So I'm not going to answer specific questions tonight like we usually read, but we've got some questions along the way. Do we feel that these vaccines are safe? Absolutely. I wouldn't get anything that I feel is unsafe. And yet I've gotten this. So I think when you see the vice president, when you see Fauci, when you see Dr. Gray and me getting the vaccines, you can be sure that we know about as much about these vaccines as anybody will. And when we get the vaccines, I think it shows that these vaccines are going to be safe and effective. And the effectiveness of greater than 90% is really remarkable. We would have been happy if the vaccines were at least 50% effective. At 90% effective, these are truly great. So again, these vaccines then got all purchased through the federal Warp Speed project, and the Warp Speed project is really pretty amazing. It really did bring these things together very quickly. Warp Speed was funded by the first CARES Act, which was a bipartisan bill, and then pushed through the Trump administration. So when we look at the things that happened in COVID, there's ups and downs, but I think Warp Speed is clearly one of the very bright spots. So this vaccine then gets bought by the feds, and then it goes to different places. And so some of this vaccine is used directly by the feds for things like Department of Defense, so we can vaccinate soldiers. Some of it is used for like the State Department, so we can vaccinate diplomats around the world. And some of it went to the executive branch, and you saw that the vice president and the first lady and the second lady and Nancy Pelosi and whatever got. So these went to the executive branch, but the majority of these then went to other areas. The majority of these, some of these went to the VA for their use. Some of them went to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the rest went to the states. And the state allocations are generally on the basis of population. So larger states got more vaccine, smaller states got less vaccine. Oregon got its share of vaccine, I think its fair share of vaccine. This vaccine then goes to different places. So the VA then gets distributed to the VA hospitals, and we've had some here. The Bureau of Indian Affairs gets distributed to the tribes. And then the states have distributed these in various ways. So the states in Oregon have distributed some to the hospitals. The states have distributed some to EMS providers. They've distributed some to a thing called the Federal Pharmacy Partnership. So the Federal Pharmacy Partnership is another interesting thing. What it was the feds worked with a number of pharmacies, CVS, Walgreens, and in Oregon, Consensus, to go ahead and get them vaccine so they could go to nursing homes and other places to distribute vaccine. And in Oregon, that's one of the places that it goes. And some goes to public health. Some will go to federally qualified health centers. And then eventually some will go to practices, medical practices, and will go to retail pharmacies. So that's where the vaccine is going to go. And so this is kind of where it is. So these are the vaccines that are produced. These are the two that are approved. These are still in the wings. All this vaccine then gets bought up by the feds. The feds then distribute it to the executive branch, the congressional, to the legislative branch, to Department of State, Department of Defense, the VA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and to the states. So that's how the vaccine gets to where it is. Now, this whole distribution effort has been done mostly by the military, and you may have seen General Perna is one of the logistics people, and really a big logistics effort because much of the early vaccine was this Pfizer vaccine that had to be kept at ultra cold temperatures, and you can imagine how hard it was to move lots of doses of vaccine over a time when people are delivering a lot of packages for Christmas and to get it there with good cold chain. So this was a remarkable effort, and this is started and is ongoing. Then the decision was who gets the vaccine and who gets it first or last. So this decision, there are two levels. First, the CDC made the broad decisions, and the CDC made the broad decisions to call in groups. I will tell you, this is one of the most annoying things that we did because we have made it far more complicated than it should be, right? You could have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. People would understand that. Instead, they had groups 1 and 2, and then split 1 into 1A, they then to 1B and 1C. Then they said the states could go ahead and further decide who's going to be in these groups. So it's very confusing now because in Oregon we have CDC group 1A, wave 1 through 5. So now 3 different levels, and in some of those waves are multiple waves. So it's very, very confusing. What I'm going to tell you today is a high-level view of what goes on. There is a multi-page document on the state website that goes into great detail about where certain small different groups fit. But I'm going to go ahead and do this in a more general way. So in Oregon, group 1A is going to be hospital employees, Now, why did we do hospital? Why did we put hospital employees first? Why did CDC put hospital employees first? They put it first because in many parts of the country, the hospitals were absolutely overloaded with patients. And if 10 or 20% of the hospital staff get sick with this, it then makes it hard for the hospitals to have enough employees to keep the hospital staff to take care of new patients that come in. So this is really a critical thing in the country. Now, I will tell you, in Oregon, if we saw today, we had less than 5 patients in the hospital. So this has not been as big an issue in Douglas County because we have a low rate of disease. But I can tell you, for the people in Southern California or in Arizona, this has just been awful. The next group is in 1A are going to be EMS and first responders. Well, in many reasons, for the same reasons we have before, right? So EMS needs to go out and pick up people who are sick, and they need to go out and pick up people who are sick, and so they can't be sick themselves. We've actually had a number of cases among EMS workers, and the concern is that if enough of them get sick, there's nobody to pick you up when they call 911. The other group that we want to really work on is people who are in nursing homes and memory care. And the reason for that is that we've noticed that although people in nursing homes are not much more likely to get it, if they get it, it's much more likely to spread in nursing homes, and they are much more likely to get really sick and die. So that's why CDC and Oregon put all of these groups in that initial group here. The other groups that are in this first group here are people who work in healthcare in urgent cares. So urgent cares are people who are seeing people on a same-day basis, sort of sick basis. Those are people who can be sick. So, for example, at the clinic I work, people call in and they say, I've been exposed to somebody with COVID, I'm sick, I need to get tested. They come in and we do the test. So obviously people who are taking care of those people are at high risk. So these are the first groups in 1A. I'm going to have to spread this out a little bit. So the first groups in 1A are hospital workers, employees, hospital employees, EMS workers, first responders, nursing home, memory care, and people who work at urgent cares. As we get further down the line here, there are other people who are in things that, for example, they may be in assisted living. And besides urgent cares, then there's now other outpatient settings. So there are people who go to dialysis, or people go to outpatient surgery center, all of whom we don't want getting sick. And then there are other healthcare workers like dentists and people in behavioral health. So this is basically the 1A group. So I'll move this over here. So this is the 1A group. This is the group we're in now. This is the group that started in mid-December and we think is going to go through January. So this is December through January. And how are we going to deliver a vaccine to all these people? Well, the hospital got 975 doses of Pfizer, and they're working on distributing this to people in the hospital. They've already given a lot of vaccine. They're doing hospital employees, plus they have done occasional other workers. For example, they vaccinated the people who are doing the swabbing at the fairgrounds today, so they're doing some of those. EMS got about 300 doses so far. EMS is going to go ahead and immunize the other EMS workers and our first responders. This federal pharmacy partnership, we don't exactly know how many doses that they got, but we think they got about 500 doses. And they're going to be giving it to nursing homes and memory care, and they've already started doing that. And over the next bits, they're going to move to assisted living and foster homes and other things. Public health so far has gotten 200 doses. And of those 200 doses, we've already given some. That was some of the vaccine. And that's going to go to our urgent cares and people who are seeing people. That's going to go out this week to those areas. Over the next few weeks, once we get these first groups done, then the vaccine is going to come through. It'll probably stop going to the hospital, may still go to EMS to do other kind of employees, but we haven't exactly figured that out. And more will come to public health. And then we're going to be working with clinics in the county, clinics already established, places you already go now to get your flu vaccine, places you already go now to get your shingles vaccine, and they'll be able to do that. We think over the next few months, the retail pharmacies will get it, and they'll also be able to immunize the people in this group. Now, the question is, how long will it take us to finish this group? Well, we think in Group 1A in Douglas County, there are 10,000 people in this group. There are 10,000 people that each need 2 doses. So to finish 1A, you need 20,000 doses. Now, that would assume that everybody is going to be finished before we start the next group. That also assume that everybody wants it. We know that there's maybe a quarter or a third of the people who don't want the vaccine, so that will decrease the number. And we certainly know as we get to the end of 1A, there may be people who've gotten the first dose of 1A, are waiting now 3 or 4 weeks to get their second dose, and during that time we could start with the next group, which is 1B. So look at this. So how many doses have we had so far? So in the first 3 weeks, we've gotten about 2,000 doses. So if we continue at that rate, it's going to take us many more weeks to get through 1A. Now, the number of doses we're going to get for this week, we found out this morning. And the visibility into how many doses we're going to get next week is poor. They say expect about the same number. And for the week after, it's like we really don't know. So my ability to predict how many doses we're going to have later on is going to be poor. And our problem of getting enough of these people vaccinated is not the people giving the vaccine. We have plenty of people to give the vaccine, and that's not been the big impediment. The big impediment is having enough vaccine. The other impediment is, so the hospital obviously has not used all of these doses, and the other impediment is whether the hospital is now allowed to redistribute. So they got this vaccine to give to hospital employees. They think they've given it to almost all the hospital employees who want to get it. The question is, can they give it to other places? And as of yesterday, the answer was no. We're still trying to see what will happen if they have extra doses. Can they give it back to the state to give to somebody else? So we haven't figured that. We haven't figured that one out yet. But at this rate, 1A could take a while. So 1A could take, the estimates are as 1A could go between December. The most optimistic estimates is that you could start on 1B at the end of January. The more realistic estimates is that 1B is not going to start until February. And 1B are people who are critical essential workers, who are not in 1A, and people not living in nursing homes who are greater than 75 years old. Now, the state is looking to see if there's other groups we may move up or down. And in fact, the state has only made one decision so far, and their one decision is that in Group 1A is also going to be teachers and early education. So teachers and early education is going to be in this 1A group. So Oregon already has moved some of the teachers to there. But we have yet to figure out who are going to be these critical essential workers. Are they food workers? Some of the states have decided they are. So in Arkansas, that's got a big poultry industry. They've decided that poultry workers are critical essential. Other areas have decided that meat packers who have a high rate of disease are critical essential workers. Other areas have decided that prison guards are critical essential workers. So we need to figure that out. But again, for the person who says, well, I'm 63 and have diabetes, where do I fit in? The story is they don't fit in until Group 1C, and Group 1C is other essential workers and people who are either greater than 65 or have underlying conditions. So one of the most common things I get, like I'm 63 and I have diabetes, where do I fit in? You fit in group 1C. When is 1C going to start? Well, 1C probably not going to start until March or April or maybe even May. And again, the problem is not people to give the vaccine, it's vaccine to give them. We think in Douglas County there are going to be about 10,000 people in Group 1A. Depending upon how we decide who are the critical essential workers, there could be anywhere from 15 to 25,000 people in Group 1B. So for example, in Douglas County, about half of the workers are considered to be essential workers. Whether they're critical or not, that's what the state is going to be figuring out. But for example, wood products workers are considered to be essential workers. Are they critical essential workers or other essential workers? I don't know. And then in Group C is another 15 to 25,000 people. And then Group 2 is everyone else. So that's going to be people who are less than 65 or people with no underlying conditions who are not essential workers, healthcare workers, or any of these other things. And that we think is about, and again, I know these numbers don't always add up, but we think this is about 50,000 people. The feds have said we're going to get these in the last quarter of 2021. So the last quarter, the last part of the second quarter, so the last fiscal quarter, but the last, so this would be somewhere between April, they will start somewhere between April and June. Now, I don't know, there's been a lot of hype about the vaccines. For example, we said we were going to have 20 million people vaccinated by the end of the year. We didn't even have 20 million doses by the end of the year, so it would have been hard to vaccinate 20 million people. So frequently these are more optimistic. I'm not trying to be either optimistic or pessimistic, but I will tell you that this is my best guess. So the best guess is that we started in mid-December. That was a good guess because we did. That we're between December and January, we're going to be able to immunize hospital employees, EMS and other first responders, nursing home, memory care, and assisted living, doctors who work in outpatient setting, including dentists, behavioral health, substance abuse, and others, and that somewhere at the last half of January or in February, we're going to be able to vaccinate teachers and other educators. When we're mostly done with 1A, we'll go to 1B. And again, 1B, not exactly well described yet. That's a bigger group, I think. We'll get our critical essential workers and people over 75. And then sometime after that, March, April, or May, as you can see, the estimate gets more fuzzy with time. That would be people who are over 75 and those with underlying conditions. And then if you're not in one of those groups, you say, when can I get a vaccine? I think the most likely is April to June. Now, over this last week or so, there have been news reports like, oh, this 33-year-old worker at Disney got it. And again, it's really hard to know how they fit in. Now, it's possible that 33-year-old worker at Disney worked at Disney during the day and was a hospital employee at night, in which case, although they were 33 and had no underlying conditions, they would have been perfectly fine to have gotten a vaccine. They would have been in a group we actually would want to get a vaccine. You've heard about some stories about people selling vaccines on the black market. As best we know in Oregon, there is no black market for vaccine. It's all very tightly controlled. So I don't think you're going to see any black market in Oregon. Other questions that have come up has been, where do the second doses come in? So when the states get these, they hold off the second dose so that there'll always be enough room for the second dose. And so these 10,000 people need 2 doses each, you're going to need 20,000 doses. Another question that comes up, do you need to get the same vaccine the second time as you got the first? The current recommendation is that you do. I know other countries, especially England, have said, well, it's not necessary, but in the US, it's still recommended. The other question is, could you take the Moderna, with this very, very high level of efficacy, could you split the dose and would it still be as efficacious? And again, we do not know the answer, although there was a lot of talk about that today, because if you split the dose, these come in 10 dose vials. If you split the dose, you could obviously get twice as many doses, and if you got twice as many doses, it would go twice as far. That's a discussion that's been a brisk discussion today, but I do not know the results of that. Now, the other thing that can happen is if we get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine or the AstraZeneca vaccine or the Novavax vaccine, that's going to put a lot of vaccine into the market, and what it does is it'll speed things up. However, it is really unlikely that we could get enough either J&J or AstraZeneca for this 1A group, because again, there's a while between the time you have your FDA hearing, by the time it then gets reviewed by the ACIP panel, by the time then it gets approved and shipped. There's probably a few weeks involved there, and we're already in the first week of January, so it's pretty hard to imagine that this will really impact the 1A group very much. However, it could certainly improve if we got more vaccine in the springtime. It could certainly move these down. So if you see, the total amount of vaccine we have in the U.S. is about 400 million doses. 400 million doses would immunize 200 million people. There are 330 million people in the U.S. So that would get us to not quite 65%. So that would not be enough to go ahead and get us to herd immunity. So the question is, how many people do need to get vaccinated to get to herd immunity? And that is a complicated question. You've heard some things along the way that have changed a bit. Here's my math. So to get to herd immunity, you need to have, this goes back to our arithmetic here, it's 1 minus 1 over the reproductive number. So the reproductive number is if you did nothing else, how many people does this spread from one person to another? The R is thought in this disease to be somewhere between 3 and 4, and that's the number we had early on when people, before we knew much about this virus. The concern is that the variant virus is thought to have an R between 4 and 5. So if the R is, say, 3, it's 1 minus 1 over 3, which is about 2/3 of the population would need to be immune to do it. However, if the number is 5, it's 1 minus 1 over 5, or 4/5, or 80% of the population. And that's why there's some concern about this. Now, when they've looked at this new variant virus and look at the mRNA that's in this variant virus and the mRNA that's in the vaccine, it looks like it's still a good match. This doesn't mean, however, that you can get a new variant that wasn't a good match, but it looks currently like the mRNA that's in the vaccine and the mRNA that's in the new virus are a reasonably good match. So if herd immunity, let's say 2/3 of the people need to be immune, that means to get 66% of the people immune, you would need to, since these are about 90% effective, you would need to get about 72% of the people, 73% of the people vaccinated. And to get 73% of the people vaccinated in Douglas County, since there's 112,000 people, we roughly need to vaccinate 80,000 people. So 80,000 people, and depending upon how fast you want to do it, it gives you an idea of how you're going to do it. So 80,000, everybody's going to need 2 doses at least of the current vaccines, which means we need 160,000 doses in Douglas County to get us to the area. Well, 160,000 doses is a far cry from what's been delivered already, which is only about 2,000. So we'll get there. The question is, how fast will we get there? We'll get there as fast as the vaccine can get delivered. So right now, there's a little bit of getting started stuff on these vaccines. So for example, you have to print up the forms and do these kind of things that take people a few days to get going. So that's why I wouldn't really pay much attention to the data about how many people are vaccinated in each county. This is like watching the second lap of the Daytona 500 and predicting what's going to happen or get too worried about what's happening on the second lap. We're still really, really early. I think Douglas County's got a great plan. We've had a lot of cooperation from the hospital, from EMS, from public health, and all of the other practices that we think we're going to be able to pull this off. Now, our plan is a little different from other places. So you may have seen some crazy pictures in Florida where they said, we're just going to take the vaccine and we're just going to have people line up and every day just give out as much vaccine as there. And so, yes, they probably have good first day numbers, but what happens is many of the people in line were probably people who were relatively low risk and then didn't protect the people who were the highest risk. In addition, it's really important that you get the first one, that you also get the second one. And in a place like that drive-through, it will be really hard to assure that 3 or 4 weeks from now, the people who got the first one have a good way to go ahead and get the second one. So the states were allowed to do it however they wanted. I think Oregon's approach has been really a good approach, and I think we're likely to wind up, depending on how much vaccine we have, to start hitting herd immunity sometime, probably not before June, but hopefully by the end of the year. The real goal would be to hit it somewhere before the fall, because you'll remember in the fall, disease really starts to come up. So that if we're not yet close to herd immunity by September and the weather starts to cool and schools start to open again, what we're going to see is an increase in the number of cases, and that's going to be a problem. The real goal would be to try and get everybody immunized through the summertime so that when school starts, we're already at herd immunity, and by the time we're at herd immunity, we would then be able to open schools and pretty much relax the other restrictions. However, in the meantime, it's really important that we keep the number of cases down. Right? If the cases go up, it doesn't really impact the immunizations very much, but what it really does impact is keeping schools open, keeping bars and restaurants open, opening gyms, the kind of things that we need if we're going to try and get back to anywhere near a normal life. So there are a couple of other questions that come up along the way. One of the questions is, will mRNA vaccines cause birth defects? There's nothing to suggest they will cause birth defects. On the other hand, checking for birth defects is really very, very difficult. There are no pregnant women in either study, so there's nothing from the study that informs us on this question. mRNA doesn't last very long in cells, so it's not something that sits there forever. And so mRNA is like a little Post-it note that goes in the cell, does its work, and then gets discarded. So mRNA probably does not linger in cells, and we wouldn't think that messenger RNA is a big risk to them. The J&J, the AstraZeneca, and the Novavax also have not been tested in pregnant women. Another question in this is, what about lactating women? Again, there were no studies of people who are breastfeeding in this, and so we don't know for sure, although messenger RNA does not appear to be a danger in breast milk, and so we don't know about that. The last question is, well, what about these side effects, these allergic reactions? And the allergic reactions have been somewhat concerning. Almost every place that has given this vaccine, starting in England and then in the US, has seen a small number of people with allergic reactions. These allergic reactions typically happen soon after the vaccine, within 15 or 30 minutes. These reactions are mostly, but not totally, in people who have a history of a severe reaction in the past. So many of the original people who had these reactions said, oh, I know what to do because I got an EpiPen because I've had a previous severe reaction. And so that's it, although there have been some people without a previous history of allergies that have also had an allergic reaction. And this makes it really careful when you get the vaccine that the people who are giving the vaccine have the ability to go ahead and administer an EpiPen or administer Benadryl should you have one of the side effects. This also makes it much less likely to be a good thing to give, for example, where we're doing the flu vaccine, where we did it in the fairgrounds. Anaphylactic reactions are almost unheard of with flu vaccines, and so you could give that in an outdoor other setting. We're a little concerned about doing this in an outdoor setting because we don't want to have to resuscitate somebody at the fairgrounds. And so these are more likely, I think, to be given in a fixed site. Now, you may be able to do it in a van, but I don't think doing it outside makes great sense, at least in the beginning. Now, we may find after a while that these reactions are much less than we thought, but I think in the beginning, we're going to be trying to give each of these in medical settings. So the hospital does it in a medical setting, EMS obviously is EMS, nursing homes is a semi-medical setting, and the urgent care is also going to be a setting. So that's one of the questions. The other question we had along the way is, can I come jump the line? Is there some way to jump the line? Well, we know that the people always want to try to jump the line, but in Oregon, there's no jump the line police, so nobody's going to stop you. On the other hand, we're trying really hard to get people to follow these prioritizations. So far, I don't think in Oregon I've heard any stories of people jumping the lines. There are some stories in the media about people in other areas jumping the line, and that could certainly be a problem. All right, well, that was 40 minutes. And so what we're going to do is we're going to save this video. When people have questions about vaccines in the future, we're going to direct them to this and have people look at the stuff we've talked about, and then that may answer most of the questions. Again, this is Dr. Bob Dannenhoffer, the Public Health Officer of Douglas County. Thanks for watching.